Right now, as you're watching this, thousands of American paratroopers are packing their gear at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, preparing to fly into one of the most dangerous regions on Earth. And here's the question nobody in Washington seems willing to answer honestly. If the United States has already won this war, as the president keeps saying, then why are we sending more soldiers into the fire? Let me take you inside what's really happening, because the story you're being told and the story that's actually unfolding are two very different things. The Pentagon is sending parts of the 82nd Airborne Division to the Middle East as the Iran war extends into its fourth week. Between 2,000 and 3,000 soldiers have received written deployment orders. The contingent includes Major General Brandon Tegmeyer, the commander of the 82nd Airborne Division, along with division staff and a battalion of the 1st Brigade Combat Team, acting as the division's immediate response force. This brigade-sized formation of about 3,000 soldiers can deploy anywhere in the world within 18 hours. The 82nd is the Army's primary forced entry unit, trained to conduct parachute assaults, seize airfields, and secure terrain for follow-on forces. But that's not all. The deployment adds to 2 Marine Expeditionary Units already en route from opposite sides of the Pacific. Together, the 2 Marine groups would offer the U.S. roughly 4,500 Marines and sailors. Combined with the 82nd Airborne contingent, nearly 7,000 additional troops have been deployed since the conflict began. These paratroopers would supplement some 50,000 troops already present in the Middle East, as well as thousands of Marines who are on their way. Now think about that number for a second. We already had 50,000 American service members in the region, and we're pouring in 7,000 more for a war the president says we've already won. President Donald Trump has repeatedly said that the U.S. has effectively won the war and that Iran's military is nearly annihilated. His Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, went even further. Speaking at the swearing-in ceremony for the Secretary of Homeland Security, Hegseth said it was the first time in history that a country's military had been so obliterated, claiming Iran's modern military had been so rapidly and historically obliterated, defeated from day one with overwhelming firepower. He then told reporters something that should send a chill down any diplomat's spine. "We negotiate with bombs," Hegseth told reporters in the Oval Office. Let that sink in. The man running America's war machine just told the world that America's idea of negotiation involves dropping bombs on the other side while extending an olive branch. And this is exactly why Iran does not trust the United States right now, not even a little bit. Iranian officials have told intermediary countries, including Pakistan, Egypt, and Turkey, that they no longer trust U.S. President Donald Trump, saying they've been deceived twice and don't want to be fooled again. And you know what? They have reasons for saying that. Iranian officials remain deeply skeptical, citing 2 previous rounds of U.S.-Iran talks during which Trump reportedly greenlit surprise military actions just days before scheduled diplomatic meetings. Last June, Israel launched an attack on Iran with Trump's backing just days before a round of nuclear negotiations. Then, 3 weeks ago, the U.S. and Iran reached a temporary agreement in Geneva to continue talks the following week, only for that dialogue to be overshadowed by a joint U.S.-Israeli strike. So twice, Iran sat down at the table, and twice, while smiling across the negotiating table, the other side launched military operations. Can you blame them for being suspicious now? Iranian officials have told the mediators, Pakistan, Egypt, and Turkey, that U.S. military movements and Trump's decision to deploy major troop reinforcements have increased their suspicion that his proposal for peace talks is just a ruse. Officials reportedly say, even if talks proceed, plans still envision another 2 to 3 weeks of war. Let me repeat that because it's critical. Even if Iran agrees to sit down and talk, the Pentagon plans to keep bombing for at least 2 more weeks. What kind of negotiation is that? Now, the administration would tell you this is smart diplomacy. Negotiate from strength, not weakness. As the Trump administration sees it, the massing of forces is a sign he's serious about negotiating from gunboats, not that he's negotiating in bad faith. As one Trump advisor bluntly put it, Trump has one hand open for a deal and the other clenched into a fist. But on the other side, Iran's military spokesperson, Lieutenant Colonel Ibrahim Zolfagari, came out swinging. In a video, the Iranian military spokesperson said the U.S. is negotiating with itself. Has the level of your internal discord reached the point where you're negotiating with yourselves? He said. He added, "Now the strategic power you used to talk about has turned into a strategic failure." And Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, he said on state TV that his government has not engaged in talks to end the war, and we do not plan on any negotiations. Meanwhile, the U.S. sent a 15-point ceasefire proposal through Pakistani intermediaries. Two officials from Pakistan described the proposal broadly, saying it addressed sanctions relief, a rollback of Iran's nuclear program, limits on missiles, and reopening the Strait of Hormuz, through which a fifth of the world's oil is shipped. An Egyptian official involved in the mediation effort said the proposal also includes restrictions on Iran's support for armed groups. Iran didn't just reject it. They fired back with their own conditions. They cited a 5-point plan that includes a halt to killings of its officials, means to make sure no other war is waged against it, reparations for the war, the end of hostilities, and Iran's exercise of sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. Iran will not allow U.S. President Donald Trump to dictate the timing of the war's end, said a senior political security official cited by Press TV. And Iran's parliament speaker, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, then issued a direct warning. We are closely monitoring all U.S. movements in the region, especially troop deployments, he said. What the generals have broken, the soldiers can't fix. Instead, they will fall victim to Netanyahu's delusions. Do not test our resolve to defend our land. Now let's talk about what those troops might actually be used for, because this is where it gets truly dangerous. Current and former military officials and analysts envision 3 possibilities for U.S. troops, none of them easy. Occupy the Iranian oil nexus of Karg Island, help in an operation to capture Iran's nuclear material, or deploy along Iran's coast to break the regime's chokehold over the Strait of Hormuz. Let's start with Karg Island. This tiny strip of land in the Persian Gulf, roughly a third the size of Manhattan, is Iran's economic jugular. It sits 15 miles offshore and processes 90% of Iran's crude oil exports. The Trump administration is considering plans to occupy or blockade Karg Island to pressure Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Last Friday, the U.S. military conducted massive airstrikes on dozens of military targets on the island. The strike was described as a shot across the bow to convince the Iranians to reopen the strait, but it was also a preparatory step to degrade Iran's military capabilities and lay the groundwork for a potential ground operation. But here's the problem. Iran has been laying traps and moving additional military personnel and air defenses to Karg Island in recent weeks in preparation for a possible U.S. operation. The Iranians have moved shoulder-fired surface-to-air guided missile systems known as man-pads there. U.S. officials and military experts say there would be significant risks, including a large number of U.S. casualties. And even if America takes the island, it doesn't solve the problem. As one analyst put it, if we seize Karg Island, they're going to turn off the spigot on the other end. It's not like we control their oil production. Some allies of the president are raising serious questions about whether there is a need to attempt such an operation, since successfully taking the island would not, on its own, resolve problems related to the Strait of Hormuz. Then there's the second scenario, the nuclear option, literally. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio told a congressional briefing that the U.S. may need to physically secure nuclear material inside Iran. People are going to have to go and get it, he said, without specifying who. But, as one expert noted, securing Iran's nuclear material would be the least realistic with this force, as it would require a far larger, sustained ground presence. The third and most horrifying scenario is a broader ground war along Iran's coastline. In a letter on Tuesday, Iran's Defense Council said any encroachment on Iranian land would lead to the mining of the Persian Gulf, not just the Strait. Iran's enormous scale and mountainous topography mean the U.S. mobilizing any conventional ground forces would require hundreds of thousands of troops. Let's be honest about the cost so far. 13 U.S. troops have been killed in action and at least 290 have been wounded. More than 2,000 people have been killed across the Middle East. In Iran, Israeli and American strikes have killed more than 1,200 people. At least 1,000 people have been killed in Lebanon and 17 have died in Israel. The U.S. military has relied on bombers, fighter planes, drones, and missiles to hit more than 9,000 targets inside Iran and has damaged or destroyed more than 140 Iranian vessels. And yet, and this is the part Washington doesn't want you to focus on, strikes against U.S. troops in neighboring countries have continued. Iran is still firing missiles. Its proxy networks are still operational. The Strait of Hormuz remains contested. Gulf allies are privately urging the Trump administration against prolonging the war by putting boots on the ground. The concern is that occupying Kharg Island would result in high casualties, likely triggering Iranian retaliation against Gulf countries' infrastructure and prolonging the conflict. Egypt's foreign minister has said there's no winning party in this dangerous escalation. Even Germany's defense minister called the war a catastrophe for the world's economies. And here's perhaps the most unsettling revelation of all. When members of Congress were briefed by the Pentagon about the ground troop plans, they came out shell-shocked. There was no plan, no strategy, no endgame shared, and they didn't give any answers. It's unclear if there isn't a plan or if there is a plan and they wouldn't share it with members, one congressional official said. No plan, no strategy, no endgame, and we're sending thousands more troops. The world stands at a crossroads right now. On one path, mediators from Pakistan, Turkey, and Egypt are trying desperately to bring both sides to a table, pushing for possible in-person talks between the Iranians and the Americans, perhaps as soon as Friday in Pakistan. On the other path, aircraft carriers steam toward the Gulf, paratroopers check their gear, and Marines rehearse amphibious landings. The highest escalation risk comes from strikes on strategic infrastructure like Kharg Island or nuclear sites, which would likely trigger a broader Iranian response. And as additional U.S. forces are drawn into the Middle East, there is a risk that other actors exploit reduced U.S. presence elsewhere. So escalation dynamics need to be assessed globally, not just within the immediate theater. History teaches us that wars are easy to start and nearly impossible to control once they escalate. Iraq was supposed to be a quick operation. It lasted almost a decade. Afghanistan was supposed to be targeted. It lasted 20 years. And now with Iran, a country touch 3.5 times the size of Iraq, with 88 million people and a fiercely nationalistic population, we're watching the same pattern emerge. Overwhelming air power, declarations of victory, then the slow, agonizing realization that bombs alone cannot achieve political objectives. The question every American should be asking right now is not whether the U.S. military can take Kharg Island or bomb another 1,000 targets. It can. The real question is, what happens the day after, and the day after that? Because nobody in Washington appears to have an answer, and that silence, more than any missile or drone, is what should terrify us all.